So friends, good morning and very warm welcome to this session. As we just finished our breakfast meeting upstairs, all the FIDC and NEST members and our representatives from different states would be coming and joining us. I would request Dr. Nagesh Kumar, who has to lead this session, to join us here on the dais, along with all the speakers who are already here. I think without further delay, we should start this session, though we are already delayed by 10 minutes. And just for chair, I see a slip which is very handy, a 5 minutes margin or end. So I think today also we would be having more stimulating discussions as we progress, and at the end of the day would have substantive conclusions and way forward. Dr. Nagesh Kumar is well known to everybody. He was my predecessor here at RIS as Director General, but for last several years is with the other speaker on the panel, what URI represents, the United Nations, and he's heading the social sector division in Bangkok. So Dr. Nagesh, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Sachin. Good morning, very distinguished members of this very important conference on South-South cooperation. As we heard yesterday, South-South cooperation is the philosophy which has been around for many years, but is now gaining a lot of momentum. And especially this session, we're going to focus on how South-South cooperation can play a very critical role in getting the sustainable development goals achieved by developing countries. And we all know that sustainable development goals is a very ambitious set of agenda, very ambitious set of transformative universal agenda before all of us. And this is a real chance and opportunity for developing countries to come out of poverty and hunger and provide a life of dignity to every one of their citizens, leaving no one behind, within a generation, just 15 years. And of course, we are already in 2018. But my belief is that with a commitment of the leaderships, which is demonstrated already in many forms, it is possible to achieve, no matter they are very ambitious. And these goals will also require a lot of resources, a lot of financial resources. In SCAP, a couple of years ago, we made a calculation of what it might entail. And so even some of the social goals, poverty, hunger, the job security, nutrition, the health and education, etc., that in many countries would require up to 20% of GDP to be deployed, over the period up to 2030. So a lot of resources will be required, and Addis Ababa Action Agenda, of course, we talked a lot about domestic resource mobilization to be the primary resource. But we have to face the reality that savings rates in many developing countries, especially least developed countries, are very low. And so they need to be supplemented. The domestic resources need to be supplemented from outside or external development finance. And that we know, we have talked for 40 years, the 0.7% target for ODA, and which continues to remain elusive. ODA in real terms and nominal terms is declining actually for the past few years. And the excuse given is that there is a crisis of migration, refugees crisis, and they are being sort of given attention out of the resources which were meant for ODA. But the interesting part is that South-South cooperation is, supplementing or complementing the ODA, which is not increasing. And the figures, if you look at the figures of South-South cooperation and resource flows, has been rising very impressively. I was struck in 2008 when I was still at RIS. I did a paper on South-South cooperation, and we tried to get a figure, one figure of South-South cooperation's magnitude. It was about $10 billion. And recently, I found that it has grown to $25 billion, and Jorge might have more updates on that, and he is, of course, best equipped to say what exactly is the quantum of South-South cooperation. But even those imperfect numbers that I found show that between 2009, 10 and 2018, there is a jump of 2.5 times, so which is very encouraging. But the potential is of course much larger. The other possibility for closing the resource gap could be the multilateral development banks bridge that gap for least developed countries and developing countries that need resources. But the existing multilateral development banks, we all know, are stuck in a very difficult situation because of the governance structures. The key players or key stakeholders or shareholders of these banks are not in a position to sort of raise their resources, and they won't let others to bring in capital, such as the Asian countries, which have substantial foreign exchange reserves and are in a position to augment the resources of multilateral development banks. So developing countries build their own institutions. So you have seen in the past few years emergence of the new is catalyzing much larger resources for investment in developing countries. So this is a very important development we should recognize. But the potential is much larger. I mean, I think South-South cooperation in finance for SDGs could be, I think, way beyond the creation of these new development, multilateral development banks and the development partnership of resource transfers. But I think South-South cooperation has a much bigger role to play in financing for SDGs, and this could include, for instance, the sharing of development experiences in mobilizing finance, mobilizing domestic resources, the innovative taxes, for instance, the way many countries have found innovative mechanisms for supporting and building, SDGs. India, for instance, is funding its primary education program, universal literacy program, through a cess imposed on income tax. This is very well known to this audience. But Bhutan and Maldives, for instance, are raising resources for green transformation through green taxes on tourism and all that. So there are many innovative new experiments going on. There is also huge potential of sharing development experiences in financial inclusion, in micro pensions, because universal social protection is also one of the SDGs. And so there are many interesting experiences from across the developing countries in micro pension, micro insurance, and then impact investments, the social impact bonds, fintech, using fintech and mobile banking. So getting access to the poorest of the poor to the modern financial services. And many other such innovations, including mobilizing private investments for SDGs, as India has done through these CSR regulation, the corporate social responsibility new rule, which requires companies to set aside 2% of their profits for corporate social responsibility, which has mobilized about $8 billion of additional resources for SDGs every year. So those are the kind of new experiments and innovations that we should learn from each other and share between us. Finally, one innovative mechanism for raising resources, which was discussed some time back in G20, but was put on the back burner because some countries are not ready for that, which is financial transaction tax. And I had done some back of the envelope kind of calculations. At the very conservative, rates of that tax, it could provide to you every year a running income of $700 billion. Imagine 5 times as much as ODA, entire ODA becoming available through a tax, which will also help in moderating the extreme volatility of short-term capital flows. So I think there are many, many areas of cooperation between developing countries to get new resources, additional resources for financing and supporting the achievement of sustainable development goals. And this is the focus of this panel, and I won't take any more of your time, but turn to our very eminent panel that Sachin has put together for this discussion. And let me just turn to this. Among the panelists, we have on my right Mr. Yuri Afanasiou, who is the resident coordinator of United Nations country team. So all different agencies that have operations in India work in coordination with Yuri. And Yuri has been, I have seen him in action for last few years, because I used to head the SCAP's South and Southwest Asia office, which is located in Delhi. And so I had the privilege of working with Yuri very closely during those times, and I'm looking forward to be part of the country team again, as I decided to move back to run that office again. So I'll begin with Yuri to take us through his thoughts on this subject, and then I'll introduce the other panelists as we go along. And because time is short and we started a bit late, maybe 6-7 minutes for an intervention. So you have the floor.
Distinguished members on the dais, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me a chance to speak to you on this landmark issue of how to finance the SDGs and